Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 346 of the podcast. It is August 24th, 2019. Joining me today is Mark Ryan. He is a transformation coach and a Lean Six Sigma black belt at Franciscan Health in Indiana. Mark is going to be one of the hosts and facilitators at our upcoming Kaizen Live site visit event at Franciscan St. Francis Health there in Indianapolis. There are only 2 spots remaining. It's a small group of 25 for the site visit. So I would encourage you to register today if you would still like to join us. You can learn more and find the link for the registration by going to kaizenlive.com. But as we talk about in the episode, Franciscan does much more than daily Kaizen now. They've built upon their foundation of staff engagement through Kaizen to add other lean practices under the banner of what they call Managing for Daily Improvement, or MDI. They also use strategy deployment and other management methods to help align the organization in their goals and improvement efforts. And you can, again, see and really get a sense of what this culture of continuous improvement is like at Franciscan. But I hope you enjoy the discussion, whether you're joining us in Indianapolis or not. If you're not able to attend this year, we do aim to do these site visits every year. This is our 4th out of 5 years that we've done it. I'm sure we're going to do it again. So thanks to Mark for his role and Joe Schwartz and others for their help in hosting this visit. We do mention Joe Schwartz in the podcast. He's my collaborator on this effort. He's my co-author for the Healthcare Kaizen books. If you want to listen to some podcasts with Joe talking about Kaizen at Franciscan, you can find those as episodes 187 and 299. You can find those by going to leanblog.org/187 or leanblog.org/299. If you want to find the page for this episode, you can go to leanblog.org/346. Well, again, we are joined today by Mark Ryan. Mark, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great. I'm glad you could join us here on the podcast. I'm looking forward to seeing you again there at Franciscan in October. Before we talk about what you're doing there, can you start off by introducing yourself to the audience? Talk a little bit about your background in your career, what you were doing before you ended up working in healthcare.
Sure. Well, first of all, my name is Mark Ryan, and I'm a transformation coach at Franciscan Health. It's a healthcare system that has about 14 hospitals spanning across Indiana and Illinois. My background is from industry, automotive. I worked with a couple of the, probably if you think of the largest used car automotive retailers out there, that's who I worked with, and that's where I first had my exposure to lean practices. I would say about in the early 2000s, one of those places decided to, even though they had the most market share, really outpace their competition by discovering lean within their system. So they hired in some senseis, and I was lucky enough to go learn from those senseis, and a switch was turned on for me there, and I've been doing this type of work ever since. And I was able to go to subsequent used car retailers and kind of spearhead lean within those systems. So that was quite an exciting opportunity. So a couple things is I think that's really neat for myself is that I've gone through 2 really large transformations with organizations that didn't have any exposure to lean. And then with working on used vehicles instead of the assembly line, there's tremendous variability in that. You could have any make, model, year of car with any amount of things wrong with them, kind of like the human body. So the transition to healthcare was a little bit easier in that sense, in that we, sometimes you have to overcome the arguments in healthcare. Well, we're not an assembly line and we're not sticking widget A and cog B together. And right. I totally understand that. So being able to go through those transformations and being exposed to the variability in my background, I think has been helpful for what I'm doing now.
Yeah, because I'm sure there were discussions around as you raised the issue, the dealer environment being different than an assembly line, and sure enough, and sometimes I hear people say, and generally, to be fair to them, these are people who really have never worked in manufacturing, but you've probably heard this. People will say things like, "Well, lean would be easy if we were just cranking out 10,000 identical widgets every day." I'm like, well, even most factories aren't so simple as to be cranking out identical widgets. Car plants don't, manufacturing environments that aren't assembly lines aren't cranking out the widgets. But I'm curious if you want to elaborate on that, or maybe just I'd also be curious to hear some of your thoughts to your point about what is it like starting from scratch with lean.
Sure. I mean, that is, those are arguments that we do hear a lot in healthcare when we're first exposing lean to healthcare. I've even seen having to overcome that objective in job descriptions. So that's pretty neat. I think, like you said, it's not even in manufacturing where there's just no variability. There's always variability somewhere. I think it's just hard for someone in healthcare to accept someone outside of healthcare. And I think for me, being able to articulate, hey, there's different years, makes, models of vehicles, any number of things could be wrong with them, and getting them to agree to that and helping them to see is, for me, how I connect, that story to help overcome that objection.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But it's a different experience trying to help. I've been part of this in manufacturing and in healthcare. It's a different set of experiences starting from scratch than it is coming in part way through a lean effort or working in a place that's already, as easily as this can be defined, already pretty lean or already down that lean journey. What are some of your other recollections around some of the challenges or lessons about starting from scratch?
Well, with the first organization, what was real nice is they were committed from the top at the very beginning. So by the time I joined the team, there was already that commitment. They had already hired the senseis at an exorbitant amount of money. So that was nice to have that commitment level. I think when I approached the second organization that really had no exposure to it, it was just getting that buy-in at the top to be committed to it. And to practice patience through that journey, because it is difficult to start from scratch, because you have to raise awareness as to what lean is, what the tools and methodologies are, start the implementation of it, and as you don't see results in the first year or so. So you will get some of that questioning, like, "Hey, does lean work?" And I got a lot of that in my past, and my answer would be yes, lean works. The question should be, can we make it work here? Mm-hmm. And that, I always put that challenge back to whoever it was that I was talking to in leadership. So, if there's enough stick-to-itiveness in the organization, I think the lean journey will be successful. So, but it is quite the challenge to get people kind of bought in throughout the organization at first.
Yeah. And you raise another good point. I mean, people on LinkedIn and different places and talk about lean failures or lean failure rates. And then part of the discussion is, well, what's the operational definition of failure? And there's a guy I know, Steve Luschel, who's written a book about why lean fails. And I'm going to have him on the podcast here soon. But I think you said it really well, maybe to paraphrase, or a different, similar way of looking at it is lean fails when people give up. You're either working on it or you've given up. It seems like at a high level, those are the only two conditions. Like you said, you've got to stick with it. It's going to be a challenge. Are you figuring out how to make it work, or have you given up? Right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So when you talk about that commitment from the top, maybe last question about the car dealer environment, like what were the motivations? You said the commitment was there. What were they trying to accomplish through lean?
Well, and it's probably typical of any business where you want to have the most market share. I think with the first organization, like I said, they were already leaps and bounds over other used car retailers. They just really wanted to distance themselves from any competition. And I think with the second one is the second business that I went to is they wanted to close that gap. So driving out waste and within the organization and being able to deliver a product at a lower price point was the name of the game there. So it was all really driven by competition.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah. And making the business stronger. I've always said, if we're talking, well, why you want to, if the focus is on quote unquote implementing lean, well, why are you implementing lean? Because we have to implement lean, or because others are implementing lean. I think that's putting the cart before the horse. It should be driven by, like you said, competitive pressures, customer needs, maybe to transition to healthcare a little bit. There's no shortage of needs in healthcare: patient-focused needs, staff-focused needs, competitiveness needs. So maybe you can touch on, elaborate on some of that, the needs and the reasons why. But I did want to ask you, how and when and why did you start working in healthcare, making that transition?
Well, I had worked in the automotive industry for all my vocation up until that point, and my resume was pretty heavily typecasted within automotive, and I felt that I had done what I could, and I wanted to be challenged in new ways. And what better way to switch from the automotive industry into healthcare? And of course, there's a big drive from healthcare to get people from industry to come in and help out with process improvement. So I just took the opportunity to come into an environment where I literally know nothing about it and try to apply my skill sets, have me kind of a symbiotic relationship, have me tell them about the tools and methodologies within lean and have them tell me about healthcare. And it's been a really great experience so far. It's really freeing, I think, within lean when you honestly don't know the answers. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where the mindsets and problem solving methodologies and skills can help us work with people to figure it out together, instead of saying, I've got the answer, let's just go implement it. Right.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So what was the time frame of you getting into healthcare?
Well, I've been with Franciscan now for about 4.5 years.
Yeah. And you mentioned, the pull from outsiders. Listeners probably know I started my career in manufacturing. Your colleague, Joe Schwartz, my healthcare Kaizen co-author. Joe started his career in manufacturing. A lot of people working in healthcare have that background. And so Franciscan, from Joe's influence and the impact Joe has had, the organization was already open to that. Unfortunately, I've talked to a lot of people who've really wanted to get into healthcare and have found that to be a real challenge. Other organizations not being as open to outsiders. But I was wondering if you could comment a little bit within your team of people working on. You're still using the banner business transformation at Franciscan, is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So of the people working as coaches and leaders within business transformation, there's a mix of people with different backgrounds. Could you share a little bit about that and maybe what it's like to have that diversity of backgrounds?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think our mix is pretty good. I mean, if I had to guess, I would say our extended team of about 16 business transformation folks are about half and half, half from industry, outside industry, and half that, just came through the ranks within healthcare. On our local team here, we have about 3 folks from healthcare and 2 from outside industry. Yeah. And I think that balance is probably necessary. Yeah. Get some movement within healthcare.
I agree. And whatever the proportion is, 50-50, 60-40, either direction. To your point, there's a lot that people can learn from each other. When I work in healthcare and get the opportunity to learn from nurses or medical technologists, or to learn the thought processes that they were taught and the focus that they have. I'm never going to be a clinician, and but I enjoy learning about their ways of solving problems and learning about the clinical and the caring aspect of healthcare, and it's great when people in healthcare are also willing to learn from people from other industries or people with methodologies like Lean and with Six Sigma. Now, your certification, you talked about Lean and the car dealerships. You have training and certification in Lean Six Sigma, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, my original training was from senseis that were brought into the organization. I did things like standing in Ono circle for an extended period of time, writing standard work in pencil, doing that type of stuff. And at the end of that time, which was about a year and a half of training, I didn't get any certificate for that, although I had the training for it. So my, I guess, quote unquote, official training is through Purdue. I did a 2.5-year study through Purdue and their Lean Six Sigma program to get a black belt. Yeah.
And those consultants you're mentioning, it sounds like that was very classically, very Toyota style. I'm sure the focus there, were they calling it Lean or were they calling it TPS? They probably was not under the banner of Lean Six Sigma under those coaches, right?
Correct. Yes. They didn't refer to it as Lean at all, right? It was just their way of doing it. And it was a very Eastern way of learning, I would say. And at the time, I wasn't as appreciative of it while going through it. But afterwards, I learned more in that span of time than I had since. So,
did they have a term or a label for it that they were helping you with?
No, they didn't.
Really?
They didn't. Yeah.
What did the organization call it? Did they call it Lean?
No, they had an acronym for it. Kind of like a TPS, a 3-letter acronym for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So at Franciscan, across those hospitals, there's terminology, and I ask you to elaborate on some of the terminology. Business transformation, Kaizen, MDI, managing for daily improvement. That's the acronym and phrase you use there, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the daily improvement, or MDI, or there's variations of different terms that organizations use to sort of describe the same lean management system or what have you. But can you talk first a little bit about what does the phrase business transformation mean as a high level label at Franciscan?
It's funny that you brought that up. We were just talking about that yesterday, and business transformation is transforming the way we look at business. So we're not called PI folks here, or PI consultants, or system redesign, although those would fit as well. We want to fundamentally transform the way we look at business, the way we approach business, the way we do business. So that's why we're titled Business Transformation. And my personal title here is a transformation coach. So I help coach people into transforming their thought processes.
Yeah, and that probably leads to discussion, or people ask, well, what does that mean to transform, and what does it mean to fundamentally transform, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have that banner of trying to transform the organization, and there's probably many components to that. But can you talk about the approach to Kaizen? When I first started visiting Franciscan, there was, and there remains, this heavy focus on engaging people in small improvements. Joe Schwartz and I have talked on the podcast before about the influence of Norman Bodek and Norm's quick and easy Kaizen approach, trying to create a culture of continuous improvement. Before we talk about MDI, can you share your observations or reflections? This Kaizen process, this path working toward a culture of continuous improvement, those wheels are already in motion when you joined the organization. So it wasn't exactly starting from scratch. What are your reflections or observations about what that means, that daily Kaizen process?
Yeah, I mean, just that. When I came into the organization, very heavily steeped in small changes for the better, implementing Kaizen. I mean, just throughout the organization, every staff member knows what Kaizen is, what it means, and how to engage in it. We have a system here within Franciscan for people to be able to enter in their Kaizens, to vet them out, to test them. All of that stuff was already implemented before I came in and joined the organization. But coming into the organization and just seeing this culture of Kaizen already here was very exciting because, once that culture is established, I think it's very easy to build on that. So I'm thankful that, that Joe and others have established that here prior to my arrival, and that has really helped us leverage what we do today with MDI or any other lean method going forward, with having that foundation there.
Yeah. So you talk about foundation, and one thing I've been struck by, and this will help transition also to talk about the MDI approach, and again, people will be able to see all of this in action if you come participate in the site visit that we call Kaizen Live. So again, you can go to kaizenlive.com to learn more about that. But you talk about that already being established. I've been impressed by sort of the approach or the mindset of continuously improving the continuous improvement process. Can you talk a little bit about that, either in terms of refinement, improvement, evolution of the Kaizen process, or it's up to you? Do you want to transition into talking about how MDI is an evolution or builds upon the Kaizen work?
Yeah, absolutely. So for MDI, really what we're doing is we're articulating strategy from our leadership and having staff drive tactics to move the needle on some strategy. And getting them to do that has been probably easier with this foundation of Kaizen, I suppose. When staff is already engaged in making improvements, it's just a natural next step or progression to put more scientific thinking maybe around that, or a little bit more structure in our MDI process around that. That's the type of feedback that we've gotten from units was they felt like they were already dipping their toes into this type of work as a next progression from the Kaizen work that's been established already here. So, I mean, while MDI spread has had its difficulties and still has its challenges, I think without having that Kaizen, without getting our whole staff involved in making improvements, this would have been a longer road to haul. So it's helped out tremendously.
Yeah. And I mean, that sort of falls in line with classic advice given by Masaki Amai, the author of the book Kaizen, and psychologists like Robert Moore, who I've had on the podcast here, talking about the psychology of Kaizen. On some level, at some point, you have to start and engage people. It doesn't matter what they're doing and how they're doing it, but start engaging them, get them, lower the bar, reduce risk or fear by working on small changes. And, that advice or that model says if you don't have engagement, if you don't start that engagement process, you won't, or that, it's hard to jump from starting from scratch to a really refined, rigorous model. I know Franciscan and Joe have always talked about taking baby steps as an approach. What are your thoughts or reflections on that idea?
Yeah, absolutely. No judgment on what type of improvement you're making, right? As long as you're attempting and trying to make that. So, I think for us or for any organization, having a small group of people doing large project work just creates constraint within the organization. So the Kaizen approach and getting everybody involved and making small change where they're at can help your organization drive change quicker. And then you start to see, as people are doing changes, small changes, those small changes over time grow into medium-sized initiatives is kind of where we're at, and that's where we laid the MDI piece on top of that. But you could see the confidence build in the frontline staff as they're making changes, as their ideas are being implemented, as we're celebrating those ideas being implemented throughout the organization.
Yeah. And one thing I've always been impressed of what Joe and other leaders at Franciscan have tried to build is this culture of, finding the balance or the sweet spot where you want to encourage people to try, but there's this middle ground. It's not a blank check or to spend whatever you want or to kind of, go take wild, irresponsible risks. And generally people in healthcare are cautious, but finding this balance of how do you coach, how do you have dialogue, how do you have a collaborative discussion that doesn't make people defensive or disengaged, so that they can build confidence, try something, see if it works, evaluate if the change is really an improvement. And if not, okay, we learned from it, go on and try something else. I mean, to me, my impressions of the Franciscan Kaizen model is that it's good cycles of plan, do, study, adjust. And other elements of lean management are cycles of plan, do, study, adjust, maybe with a different level of rigor or detail to it. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we do here. We use the PDSA cycles, but it does involve a lot of reflection. We like to ask the question a lot, how might we, to properly scope down, if someone wants something that's too large of a change, we don't discourage that in any way, but we ask, a series of questions. And one of our favorites is how might we do this maybe on a smaller scale or a smaller test of change with this shift on this unit.
Yeah. So can we delve a little bit more into MDI? You said it starts with strategy and focusing on, I'm paraphrasing, it seems like the idea is focusing on the needs of the organization, not just implementing methods. But what are some of the methods and the mindsets that you teach and practice under that banner of MDI?
Well, we use, we're trying to drive strategy, and we use some visual management pieces. Probably you've seen in other healthcare systems or out in industry, but we use some visual management pieces to really articulate what is the strategy that we're trying to drive. And then we, through the nursing shared governance, through representative staff, we work with them to help them create tactics that will drive strategy through using a PDSA model, and just, having them use these visual management pieces, which ultimately breaks down into a daily huddle board where they can stand in front of that and understand whether they're winning or losing each day with some kind of process measure that's driving a larger outcome. So really, it's a system that uses visual management. We're driving tactics, and then we also invite leadership to come and look at maybe on a monthly basis or biweekly basis how well the unit's doing and how they're problem solving and how they're driving change. Yeah.
So is a lot of what you're doing, I mean, some other organizations, and I know you from your exposure to other organizations, a lot of people would use a phrase like leader standard work or standard work for leaders. That's a different way of describing some of what's going on under the MDI label, right?
Yes. Yeah. So there's a bunch of stuff that's going on under the MDI label. So really within business transformation, we're doing strategy to planning and deployment, value stream transformation, and the MDI. But even within the MDI, we have advisory councils, leader standard work. We got standard work for the frontline staff. We're using, like I said, different boards. We have a Gemba board, a continuous improvement board, huddle boards. We're doing audits. We're making sure we're celebrating and communicating what our changes are to staff. There's a lot to it, but we try to break it down into smaller pieces so it's more digestible for staff when we're going through that.
And that was part of the adoption or implementation or spread strategy to break it into those smaller pieces. Can you talk more about that?
For the spread piece, we recognize there's other systems that are doing this type of work. So we studied that type of work, and we wanted to be real careful. And I know this is said a lot, but we wanted to be real careful not to copy and paste someone else's system into ours. So we spent about a year, I would say a year and a half, in a model area, just trying to develop what those visual management pieces would look like, what they would house, and really trying to understand. So we've gone through several iterations of our visual management pieces, of our A3s, of our approach to when we meet together. So we landed finally on something that we felt like works, is pretty intuitive and makes sense for staff. And then we did spread from there. So today we're in all inpatient units. Our team is a very small team, but we were able to get to all inpatient units this year.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more, sort of try to paint a picture of, and again, it'll be a more vivid picture when you see it in person.
Yeah.
I had a chance to see 2 years ago. I'm really interested to see how it's evolved and spread when I'll be back there. So let me mention again, what we call the Kaizen Live event. Maybe we just need to call it Franciscan Live, because it's not just Kaizen, it's now Kaizen and MDI, but you can go to kaizenlive.com if you want to learn more. We still have a couple of spots left in this event that is, again, almost full. But can you try to paint a picture, when you coach leaders and you ask them to go and see, and you've got the boards, and Kaizen has been Franciscan has been intentional about talking about behaviors for leaders related to Kaizen. What are some of the behaviors that you would hope to see when leaders go and see?
Well, we actually have a leadership development matrix. So we've kind of asked ourselves the question, what do we want from leaders as we go through this process? We keep track of different things that we'd like them to do, whether it's becoming informed about Kaizen and reading maybe a book like Healthcare Kaizen or something like that. But we track their progress in learning on a matrix. We ask them to go through lean training. We have some workshops available for that. And then we have some workshops available specifically for the MDI process. Some other things that we expect maybe from the leaders is, for them to understand leaders' standard work and to attend Gemba walks. So we do have great participation with our leaders, and they are very involved with coming to those MDI pieces or those boards, looking at those, being able to understand what's going on in what unit very quickly, and being able to understand how staff is driving tactics to move the needle on those metrics.
Yeah. One other thing I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about. There's that foundation of Kaizen as PDSA cycles. You mentioned strategy deployment, which I would argue is a higher level organizational PDSA cycle, or longer cycles. And then you mentioned A3s, and I'm sure a lot of the audience is familiar with A3 problem solving and that approach, which is arguably a different form of PDSA. Can you talk about, as this has evolved, how do Kaizen, if you will, to use Norm's term again, quick and easy Kaizen, smaller Kaizens, just do it. How does that coexist with the A3 rigor?
Well, it's a good question. So we practice Lean Six Sigma here. So really, when we're doing our training, we say, some of the methods for problem solving that we have include Kaizen, our PDSA cycles, and potentially DMAIC. So we tend to say that the closer we are to certainty and the closer we are to agreement, basically the easier it is, the quicker, the just do it type stuff, that's Kaizen. So does this affect me and my world and what I do on a day-to-day basis? Will it improve what I'm doing? Yes. Can I implement it fairly easily? Yes. Does it have a huge impact on staff? Do we need to change anything or write anything out? No. Well, then let's just do a quick and easy Kaizen. That's not to say that a Kaizen couldn't be very large or a DMAIC couldn't be small, this is just a rule of thumb. So the more we radiate out from certainty and agreement, if it's bigger than just my personal work and it now involves maybe the whole unit being able to participate or we're writing some kind of standard work for this, we apply that PDSA cycle to these larger improvements. And then again, as we radiate out even further from certainty and agreement, if it's something enterprise-wide, we might consider, a problem-solving approach like a DMAIC.
So so you mentioned PDSA and then you mentioned DMAIC, which I guess most listeners would know from Six Sigma or Lean Six Sigma. Are your A3s structured around the DMAIC framework, which is arguably a variation on PDSA?
Yeah. Yep. Our A3s house our PDSA and or DMAIC in them. Is
that sometimes a matter of preference, or whether or not somebody has had Lean Six Sigma training versus just the Kaizen and A3 training?
I would say what dictates which one we use is probably the scope of what we're trying to do.
Okay.
And the sensitivity of what we're trying to do. I would say for a large part, maybe 98% of what we do is all PDSA reflected on our A3s.
Oh, okay. And maybe it's just one other question, because I've met, I know Joe has a background in both Lean and Six Sigma. When I've had a chance to visit and I've blogged about her, one of the highlights has been meeting one of the nuns there, Sister Martha Ann, she who has the Lean Six Sigma green belt and has presented about problem solving and improvement and statistics and how she encourages others. How is the Six Sigma side of Lean Six Sigma becoming more prevalent, or are there pockets of it? Does it depend on the situation? Call in someone like yourself who's a black belt?
Yeah, I would say it's situational. I would say 4.5 years ago when I came into the organization, they were heavily on the Six Sigma portion. Mm-hmm. So they had a lot of outside training coming in and give them the Six Sigma piece. Joe has been here with the Kaizen piece, but I think the Kaizen piece is probably where Lean stopped prior to my arrival. And I'd say over the last 4.5 years, just here at Franciscan, we see a pretty big shift from more of the Six Sigma methodologies to more of the Lean methodologies. So I would say the majority of what we do is more on the Lean side. We still consider ourselves Lean Six Sigma organization, so we haven't, jettisoned the DMAIC or approach, but we still have that within our toolbox if necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, and the approaches can coexist. And it's just interesting to see, if you will, the variations. Some organizations that label what they're doing Lean Six Sigma are 90% Six Sigma. It's predominantly Six Sigma with a little bit of Lean. I'm not asking you to put numbers on it, but it sounds like there at Franciscan, the balance is different. There's a lot of Lean practice with some Six Sigma practices as are helpful, as opposed to trying to train everybody and certify everybody in a belt, right?
Correct. Yeah, we lean more towards the Lean side now. I would say we're about 90% Lean. I think that the organization, as they're exposed more and more to just the Lean tools and methodologies, the philosophy behind Lean, they're jazzed about that. It really resonates. I think Lean really resonates. It's a little bit more agile than the DMAIC, and that along with nurses' thinking processes lines up a little bit better. Mm-hmm. You have maybe the doctors who are a little bit more scientific minded, but with the staff, you see their upbringing and their training is life or death decision. We're thinking really quickly, and going through cycles of change that are a little bit smaller on the PDSA scale, really, I think lines up a little bit better with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are times where, I think the structure of A3 problem solving, organizations that really use Toyota Kata can find that resonates with docs and scientists as well, as sort of having a structured way of framing and posing and testing different hypotheses about change.
Yeah.
So I was asked, you mentioned earlier that, when it was sort of, all Kaizen approach, that was a good foundation, that it made it easier to build upon that engagement and participation with MDI. If, let's say, your organization comes and visits and sees what you're doing, where Kaizen and MDI, coexist. And Joe and I have been talking about some of the prep. We're going to see some areas where it's very Kaizen heavy. I think one department that's really predominantly MDI focused, some organizations that are doing both, maybe more even balance. So that, we'll see some of that variation and how it evolves. But let's say an organization comes and says, well, I'm really jazzed about Kaizen and MDI, and I want to go implement that all next month. Would you recommend, hey, do what you think works? Don't copy and paste, do your own pilot. Would you suggest, well, maybe you should take baby steps and start with Kaizen? I know it's hard to give blanket advice maybe, but what are your thoughts on that?
Right. I probably would advise both, do what works for your system. But my personal recommendation would be, start with that Kaizen foundation. I think for me here coming into this and having that foundation, I think it's really helped the progression of the MDI. So that would be my advice. How that looks in another system could be totally different, but getting people used to doing small tests to change, small improvements, and building their confidence, and then developing more and more structure around that as the confidence builds, I think is a really good approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when we talk about the spread and the adoption of MDI, and earlier you talked about challenges and the idea of how might we. What are some of the things on your mind and the mind of others there about challenges with the further spread and evolution of MDI? What sort of how might we questions are you asking about that?
I think for just us here, the challenges that we probably run into is maybe resourcing of our department, and we could spread a mile wide and inch deep, but when you do that, there's some risk, in sustainability. So, do you want to just stay with, you want to go inch wide and a mile deep? Would that be better? So we're trying to really figure out some of that without having the resources to kind of come in and just train everybody and get everybody up to speed. That I would say is a risk. There's something to look at. Trying to think of what other, it's all getting your executive buy-in, senior leader buy-in, I think is super important for this. Having them help promote. I think we've run into some struggle in the past because we really started with the middle management and tried to radiate out both ways. And I think if there's not an interest from upstairs, then you might not have people that are managing through the process, or when they come up to obstacles, they may be a little bit more resistant to persevere through those. So getting the energy from the top level management, understanding the spread for your organization, I think is super important so that you don't run yourself too thin too quickly. Agreed.
And, during the site visit, one of the things I'm excited about, there's a lot of things I'm excited about it. This will be my fourth time helping co-organize one of these events. It'll probably be my sixth or seventh or maybe eighth visit overall in the last 10 years. And, for one, it's energizing. The people at Franciscan are really open about sharing, but it comes from such a humility. This is not a place to come and find people who say, well, we've got it all figured out. We're awesome. You need to just follow us. So I always admire and appreciate that. And, when we have these sessions, we'll go and see and do Gemba visits in different departments, pharmacy, NICU, endoscopy, and general medical inpatient unit. We'll talk to leaders and staff. We'll have people leaders from different levels of the organization come talk to us. And then there's going to be that learning and sharing. We've got people coming from across the U.S. and some people coming from Canada, to learn and share their own experiences about what are they doing to get their leaders involved. And I know the Franciscan people will be in those discussions looking to learn as much as they are trying to share. So those are some of the things I'm looking forward to. Is there anything, Mark, you've participated and helped facilitate some of these. Is there anything in particular? I'm sure there is. So what are you looking forward to with an event like this?
No, I all the things that you just mentioned, I'm looking forward to as well. I think for those who are coming, I think they'll benefit greatly from seeing. I know I always benefit when I go to see another place, and you're in the environment. You can look at what they're doing. You can ask questions. For myself, whenever we have guests come in at these Kaizen live events, I always tend to I might get a little bit more from them than they get from us. I don't know, but it's just meeting with some new folks from different regions and inquiring what they're doing, having them be able to look at what we're doing and speak maybe specifically to maybe how we can make some improvements to what we do, and how they may be doing it a little bit differently. So I think we definitely benefit as an organization by getting to host these events as well with you. So I'm looking forward to the time spent together and for those who are coming.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thanks in advance for what's going to be a great couple of days together. One of the things we're going to do to help structure some of the networking and the discussion, we're going to use an approach called Lean Coffee. And Mark, I was going to ask you, I'll let you tell the story and correct me. You've started, or you run or participate, or all of the above, in a group called Lean Coffee Indy. Can you talk a little bit about that? And if people listening are local to you, how can they get involved in this?
Sure. Lean Coffee I think it's worldwide. It's across cities within the nation. Started by Jim Benson, and really, it's just a way to have a networking event. We have it here in Indy. We get together. We currently do it with healthcare improvement science folks within our area. We'll meet maybe once a quarter. And we do what's called that Lean Coffee portion, which is kind of an agenda-less, multi-voting process where you think about topics to talk about, you vote on those topics, and then have some time discussions around those topics. Hopefully get a nice smaller group size together to have some really good dialogue. And then we report out on some maybe ahas that we've had during that time together to the extended group. So here in Indy, like I said, we host that about once a quarter. We just had one a couple weeks ago. Usually we try to go to a different healthcare facility each time. And this last one we went to, a lot of the topics of discussion, a lot of the posts that we see is about executive buy-in. So we had an executive panel. We had 7 executives from different healthcare systems come and sit and answer questions. So that was really fun. So we had 7 executives and about 70 attendees come to our last one. And if there's anyone in the Indianapolis area that's interested, we do have a group on LinkedIn called Lean Coffee Indy. So you can look us up that way.
All right. So it's great that you're doing that, and thank you for sharing a little bit more about that and for participating in that during the event. Again, we're going to have to maybe think about renaming it. We're calling it Kaizen Live. There's so much good stuff to look and see and learn from and at Franciscan St. Francis Health. Again, the event's being held in Indianapolis. The main days of the site visit are October 3rd and 4th. We'll get to look at and talk about practices, everything Mark talked about here: Kaizen, MDI, A3, engaging leaders, strategy deployment, how this all fits together. We also have an optional Kaizen class on October 2nd that Joe and I will be co-facilitating, and about half of the attendees have chosen to take that option. So, it's a small, intimate event. It's not a big mega conference. We only have room for 25 people. At the time of this recording, there's 5 spots left. So if you're interested, I would encourage you go ahead and take a look at the webpage and the registration page, kaizenlive.com. But Mark, to give you the last word, is there any other kind of advice or thought that's on your mind here that you'd want to share with healthcare leaders or even people back in industry, kind of other lessons or reflections related to what you've learned and done and practiced during your career?
Well, during my career, I made that switch from industry into healthcare. So, some advice would be don't be afraid to step out and try something new and something different, something that continuously challenges you. And that's really what we're asking our staff to do, is to be challenged and to think differently. So I think that goes the same for us. If you're listening out there and you're wondering about the Kaizen Live event, I would challenge you to come out and see what's going on. Maybe thinking about Kaizen a little bit differently. I know that when I came into healthcare, just the Kaizen approach that was already established here, based off of the work that you and Joe have done, was a really good foundational piece. So I would challenge folks listening out there, if you don't have sophisticated lean systems in wherever you're working, maybe start small. Start with this Kaizen approach. And getting leveraging your whole staff to really get involved with improving what it is that they do.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, Mark, for sharing that and everything you've talked about today. Again, our guest has been Mark Ryan. He's a transformation coach at Franciscan Health, based in Indianapolis. Mark, really looking forward to seeing you in October, and looking forward to continuing the learning and the conversation and the collaboration. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.